The American Revolutionary War, which erupted in the spring of 1775, was not the sudden outburst of violence that many might imagine, but rather the inevitable result of decades of growing tension, misunderstandings, and a relentless desire for autonomy among the 13 American colonies along the eastern coast of North America. By the mid-18th century, these colonies had grown in population, wealth, and self-confidence, nurtured by thriving trade, fertile lands, and a culture that had begun to develop its own identity separate from Britain. The British Crown, under King George III, sought to maintain control over this expanding empire, yet its methods of governance increasingly clashed with the expectations and lived experiences of the colonists. Across the Atlantic, Parliament passed laws and levied taxes, often with little understanding of colonial life, and expected unquestioned obedience. Within the colonies, local assemblies, town meetings, and community organizations reflected an emerging political consciousness, a belief that governance should be by those who were directly affected by the laws, and that representation was essential to fairness. This clash between imperial authority and local self-determination created a simmering tension that, though invisible to outsiders, shaped every interaction between colonists and British officials. The immediate causes of the war can be traced back to Britain's efforts to recover from the financial strain of the 7 Years' War, which ended in 1763 with enormous debts. The colonies, which had fought alongside Britain, were expected to contribute to the repayment of these debts, yet they had grown accustomed to a significant degree of self-governance and believed that taxes should only be levied by their own assemblies. The imposition of the Stamp Act in 1765, requiring that legal documents, newspapers, and various paper goods carry a tax stamp, ignited outrage. Far from being a simple financial matter, the Stamp Act touched the core of colonial identity and principle, giving rise to the slogan "No taxation without representation." Citizens organized protests, boycotts, and demonstrations, and local leaders like Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry became vocal critics of British policy. These early conflicts were not yet battles with muskets and cannons but were fierce political confrontations, with rhetoric, petitions, and public gatherings challenging the authority of the Crown. Each new act passed by Parliament, including the Townshend Acts, which imposed duties on imported goods like glass, paper, and tea, further inflamed tensions, creating a sense that Britain was deliberately attempting to undermine colonial autonomy. One of the most dramatic sparks came in 1773 with the Boston Tea Party, an audacious protest against the Tea Act, which granted the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales. Colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships and dumped entire shipments of tea into Boston Harbor. This act of defiance was both symbolic and strategic, demonstrating the willingness of the colonies to resist British policies physically. In response, Parliament enacted the Coercive Acts, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts, which closed Boston's port, restricted town meetings, altered the Massachusetts Charter, and allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried outside the colony. These measures, intended to punish Massachusetts and deter further rebellion, instead had the opposite effect. They unified the colonies and strengthened the shared sense of injustice. Letters, pamphlets, and newspapers spread the news rapidly, rallying support across towns and villages, and creating a common colonial identity rooted in resistance and self-determination. The First Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia in September 1774, bringing together delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies to discuss collective action. This Congress was a historic assembly, marking a moment when disparate colonies began to act in unison, moving from isolated complaints to coordinated planning. Resolutions were passed demanding the repeal of the Intolerable Acts and affirming colonial rights, and a call was made for a boycott of British goods. This was a step toward unity and represented an ideological shift. The colonies were beginning to see themselves not merely as British subjects but as participants in a shared struggle for freedom and recognition. At the same time, Britain, under King George III and his advisors, viewed these measures as a challenge to authority that could not be tolerated. The stage was set for conflict, with both sides increasingly unwilling to compromise and both convinced of the righteousness of their cause. The first exchange of gunfire that would ignite the full-scale war occurred on April 19, 1775, in the towns of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. British troops, under General Thomas Gage, were ordered to seize colonial weapons and suppress the growing insurgency. However, colonial militias, well aware of the British movements, prepared to resist. In the early morning at Lexington, a brief but tense confrontation erupted, resulting in casualties among the colonial militia. The soldiers then moved toward Concord, where they faced further resistance and ultimately retreated after unexpected and determined opposition from local fighters. The significance of these battles extended far beyond the immediate loss of life. They represented the transformation of political dissent into armed resistance. Ordinary citizens, farmers, and townspeople had taken up arms, risking homes, families, and lives in the name of principle. These engagements demonstrated that the colonies were prepared to fight not merely for minor grievances but for the very idea of self-governance and liberty. By the time these initial clashes occurred, both sides had become aware of the high stakes. Britain was determined to maintain control over its most lucrative colonies and project authority across the Atlantic, while the colonists were increasingly committed to defending their rights at all costs. This conflict was not merely territorial, it was ideological, challenging notions of empire, obedience, and freedom. Ordinary citizens faced moral dilemmas. Should they remain loyal to the crown, or should they risk everything for independence? The early months of the war saw communities divided, families torn, and the social fabric stretched as tensions escalated from rhetoric to armed engagement. What began as a series of grievances over taxation, representation, and local governance had now become a war for survival, identity, and the future of a continent-spanning empire. In this context, the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War emerges not as a single event but as a deeply layered process, built upon years of accumulating frustrations, cultural divergence, and philosophical evolution. The battles at Lexington and Concord were the culmination of a long narrative, where ideas, policies, and human decisions intersected in a moment of irreversible consequence. The war's beginning encapsulates the complexity of human ambition and fear. It illustrates the challenge of governance across distance, the collision of competing principles, and the extraordinary courage required to stand against an empire. These opening moments of the war, rich with drama, strategy, and human emotion, provide the foundation upon which the struggle for independence would unfold, a struggle that would eventually redraw the map of the world and define the birth of a nation.